Hey everybody, my name is Leah. I'm the author of the Jewish Cookbook, and we are here today to make Hamentashen. Hamentashen are one of my absolute favorite Jewish cookies, and it is a cookie that I associate with Purim, the holiday of Purim. It's actually a cookie I only eat during that time of year because it's such an emotionally resonant cookie for that time of year. I know there's lots of people who eat them all year round and go to bakeries, but for me it's a very seasonal cookie. So they're very easy to make once you know how to do it, but I am glad that I'm going to be able to show you some of the kind of crucial steps to give you Hamentashen success, because sometimes they don't turn out quite how you want them, and it's nice to know a few things in advance. So we'll get to that in a second. So we're starting with flour, and to the flour I'm going to add salt, kosher salt, and baking powder. There are actually a couple of different types of Hamentashen recipes. Some Hamentashen doughs are actually yeast-based doughs. That's kind of the more traditional Eastern European style. But the one that has become sort of more prevalent in the United States is more of like a butter cookie dough. They're both delicious, but they're kind of, I would say that the yeast-based ones are a little bit more on the pastry end of the spectrum, and the butter dough ones are a little more on the cookie end of the spectrum. But this is the one that I grew up making. And when I was growing up, my mom was sort of like the queen of the kitchen, and we didn't often do that much in the kitchen with her, but the one exception every year was we made Hamentashen with her. And we would just get our entire kind of kitchen table just like covered in flour, and really it was one of my favorite memories of being a kid and celebrating the Jewish holidays. So we have here butter. If you wanted to make this dairy-free, you could use a high-quality margarine like Earth Balance. And we're also going to add sugar. And we're going to get those started in our mixer. Oops, I got a little butter on the mixer. So like any kind of basic sugar cookie, what you want to do is get your butter and your sugar creaming together before you add anything else. Just at medium-high speed. You want the color to sort of lighten, and you want it to get sort of aerated and fluffy. So you're kind of waiting for the butter and the sugar to decide that they like each other, and then, really combine. And one of my favorite things about Hamentashen is the kind of canvas for creativity that they offer. They're traditionally filled with either poppy seeds, like ground poppy seeds, or prune jam is very common. Apricot jam, which we're using today, is very common. But you can really add anything you want, from Nutella to peanut butter and jelly. We often do like raspberry jam and chocolate chips. So you can really get as creative as you want. But the cookie originally is related to an Eastern European cookie just called Hamentashen, which basically means poppy seed pockets. And they got the name Hamentashen it's a play off of the name Haman, which is the villain of the Purim story. So they took a cookie that already existed, Hamentashen, and called them Hamentashen. And you'll see they're triangle-shaped cookies. People often say it's meant to be Haman or Haman's hat. But linguistically, Hamentashen actually is, it means like poppy seed pockets. So you can say it's Haman's pockets. You can say it's his hat. Some people say it's his ears. But really, whatever it is, you're like eating the enemy, which is kind of a horrible and wonderful little tidbit of the holiday. All right, so I'm going to add 2 eggs and my vanilla. We're going to let that come back up. If you go kind of globally around the world, there's actually lots of different treats that are eaten on Purim that reference Haman. I think Moroccan Jews make sort of a bread that uses hard-boiled eggs for his eyes. It's in like the shape of a face, and so they kind of are eating a symbol of his face. And there's also a cookie that's called like Haman's ears. That's a fried dough. So Hamentashen are kind of part of that larger category. And we're actually going to stop just to scrape this down. You want to make sure that all of the butter and egg get incorporated together before you add your flour. There are also oil-based Hamentashen doughs that are also really good, and I actually like making them sometimes because you don't have to chill the dough really at all. You can just kind of roll straight from the mixer. But you can't really beat the taste of butter. Okay, so once that's mixed up, we're going to add it's flour, baking powder, and salt. That looks pretty good. And we're going to add it in a couple of stages, just to not overwhelm the wet mixture too much. And again, you're looking for a dough that's sort of soft but pliable, and just firm enough that you can roll it out after it's sat in the fridge for a little bit of time. That happens a lot when I'm making these at home. Just have flour everywhere. There's a certain, you have to surrender to the mess when you're making Hamentashen. Okay, so we're almost there. I don't know if you can see the consistency. It's this is still a little bit sticky, so I'm going to add the rest of the flour, but it's starting to come together. So I'm going to scrape down the sides. Put the last of our flour in there. And just get that going. So I have here a piece of saran wrap. You can also use a Ziploc bag if you would prefer. But what I'm going to do is get our dough. It's just the right consistency. You can see it's kind of tough, but still very pliable. And I'm going to gather it into a ball and then make it into a disc. So I'm going to take the dough and just kind of pat it into a disc, and then wrap it up in the saran, pat it so it's kind of flush, and stick it into the fridge for about an hour or two. You can do this up to a day or even two before until we're ready to fill and roll it. All right, so we are back. We have our dough, which has been chilling in the fridge. It's nice and firm. And I like to roll just half of it at a time because I find I don't have the counter space to roll the whole thing at once. I mean, here you probably could, but in my home kitchen, I like to work with a little bit less at a time because I find it more manageable. So we're gonna start with some flour, which helps it from sticking. And I'm going to flour my pin as well. And here we're not looking for any particular shape. What we're basically looking for is dough that is uniformly about 1/4 inch thick. Some recipes go as thin as an 1/8 inch, but I actually find that when I roll them that thin, they tend to burn quickly in the oven. And they get these kind of crispy, brittle brown edges, and we want to kind of avoid that burned scenario. So 1/4 inch is sort of my sweet spot. And you can see I'm flipping the dough over just to make sure we're getting an even roll and get the flour from the board is kind of evenly getting where it needs to go. When I was growing up, we always used wine bottles to roll. Because we had only 1 or 2 rolling pins, and we would always be rolling as a family, and so one of us would invariably use a wine bottle as a rolling pin. So feel free to do that if that's what you have on hand. Okay, and if any little cracks sort of appear, you can kind of just smooth them out with your finger. The thing about working with dough, whether it's a yeast dough or just a simple sugar dough like this, is you kind of want to make sure that you are in charge of the dough and the dough's not in charge of you. I think sometimes people, understandably, if they're new to working with it, feel like they don't know how to handle it, and really just confidence is key. Okay, so that looks good. So I have here a 3-inch round biscuit or cookie cutter. When I was growing up, we always used a glass, just like a regular like juice glass. So if that's what you have, you can use that as well. You don't have to necessarily go out and buy a new piece of equipment, but these biscuit cutters definitely give you more precision. And you just want to try to stamp out as many rounds as you can. And you will end up rolling, gathering the scraps and re-rolling it when you're done. So I sometimes even roll it twice. Some people say the cookies get really tough, but I don't notice too much of a difference. And after you roll it, you're ending up with a little circle like this. And this is the moment where your Hamentashen can either be blissful and beautiful, or things can go south. So this is a part that I really want to focus on. So a lot of people take their jam or whatever, their poppy seeds or whatever they're filling it with, and they overfill. So they try to, shove like a tablespoon into the cookie. And I have found that that is one way to basically ensure that your cookies are gonna open in the oven. So you wanna stick with maybe like between a half teaspoon and a teaspoon. The second thing is people tend to just sort of gather the edges. You're trying to go for this triangle shape and just pinch. And that can work, but they often will split. They'll look beautiful on your baking sheet and then they'll split in the oven. And you'll end up with sort of like kind of a Frankenstein, like half cookie, half monster situation. So what I like to do is, I call it the fold and pinch method. So you start by taking one side and kind of folding it over on an angle. And I promise once you've done it a couple times, it's not fussy or precious. You kind of just get into the habit of it, the rhythm. And then you fold the other side over. And then you fold the bottom, and one side goes on the top and the other side you tuck under so that you end up with a little parcel like that. And then you can kind of pinch if you want your sides. And then you have a beautiful, almost guaranteed to not open cookie. And if it does, then, I don't know what to tell you. But this is actually a nice time to have a knife or a bench scraper, because your dough is getting warmer all the time. And so as you go, it gets harder to get them off of the surface. So actually, it's not a bad idea to loosen them all. Take off all of your excess dough. And, if the dough gets too soft, you can throw it back in the fridge for, 5 or 10 minutes to let it refirm up. Some people like to, cut all their circles and then do all of their filling and folding at the same time. Some people like to work one cookie at a time, so whatever works best for you. And you can see, because it is somewhat like labor intensive, it is a nice thing to do with other people. When I first moved to New York and I celebrated my first Purim, kind of away from my family, I invited a bunch of friends over and we made Hamentashen together, and it goes a lot faster when you're making them with friends. Okay, so now I have all of my little dough circles. So you can fill a couple at a time. And then all you have to do is fold them over, tuck it under, pop it on your sheet. Another trick to making sure that they don't open in the oven or leak is to make sure that the filling that you're using is on the thicker side. You don't want to use any sort of jelly that doesn't have any kind of body to it. Like a grape jelly would just run all over. I've tried with lemon curd, that ran all over the baking sheet. So you want to use a thicker filling, like a jam. And one thing you can do to even make it kind of thicker is put the jam into a food processor along with some nuts and some cinnamon, and kind of like blend it all together until you have a bit of a paste. And those are really, really nice. Thicker fillings are definitely your friend when you're making Hamentashen. And feel free to get creative. Whatever flavors, the worst thing that happens is like it's not the best cookie you've ever had. So it's worth kind of taking some time and inviting people over and having them all bring a filling if you're going to make them with friends. That's a really fun way to do it. So here we are. These just came out of the oven, and you can see they are fairly pale on the middle, but the edges have these beautiful little kind of golden brown crispness to them. So that's how you know they're ready. You don't want to overbake them. They'll get tough. So you really want them to kind of shine as like the sugar cookie, butter cookie that they are. So we can just plate them. And I love serving these for the holiday. If you were going to serve them away from the holiday or just any other time of the year, they'd be delicious with tea or coffee, sort of like an afternoon nibble. They don't have like that kind of star quality of a dessert for me. They're more of like a snacking cookie. So that's how I would probably serve them, is like when guests came over in the afternoon, they cup of tea, cup of coffee. Yeah, let's see how they taste. The sugar cookie is so buttery and so tender, and the inside has this like delicious sort of tangy sweetness, and they're so wonderful. I may actually revise my policy and start eating Hamentashen year round.